Imagine coming home after a long trip, tired and eager to rest in your bed, only to find that something feels off the moment you reach your building. The lights in the hallway are on, but the silence is deafening. You look around, but there's no one in sight. No footsteps, no conversations, not even the usual sound of a TV from your neighbor's apartments. It's as if the entire building has suddenly become deserted. And worse, when you try to find answers, no one seems to know where all the residents have gone. This was the terrifying reality Paulo faced when he returned home after a week away. But before we dive deeper into this unbelievable story, take a second to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Every week we bring you new mysteries that will challenge your perception of reality, and you definitely don't want to miss any of them. And if you've experienced something unexplainable or know someone who has gone through something strange, leave your story in the comments. We're curious to know. Paulo was an ordinary man. He lived in a middle-class apartment building in a quiet neighborhood. After spending a week on a work trip, he couldn't wait to get back to his routine, see his neighbors, and relax. He had always maintained a cordial relationship with everyone in the building. He knew the families that lived there, exchanged greetings in the elevator, and occasionally attended the building's meetings. It was the kind of place where nothing extraordinary ever happened until that day. When Paulo entered the building that evening, he noticed the unusual silence. There were no sounds of the gate opening and closing, no cars pulling into the garage. He thought it was strange but didn't worry at first. He took the elevator, and as soon as he stepped onto his floor, the silence became even more unsettling. No lights were on in any of the windows, no movement at all. He went to his apartment, unlocked the door, and stepped inside, expecting to hear some noise from the surrounding apartments. But the silence persisted. Once inside, Paulo tried to distract himself by turning on the TV, but the feeling that something was wrong wouldn't leave him. The next morning, he went out to get the newspaper and have coffee at the corner cafe. On his way out, he noticed the doorman wasn't at his post. Strange. He thought maybe the doorman had taken a break or was handling something else. However, when he returned, the building was still empty. The elevators hadn't moved from the same floors they had been on the night before, as if no one had used them. Paulo decided to knock on some of his neighbors' doors, but no one answered. Every apartment was locked, with no signs of life. Confused, he headed to Dona Vera's apartment, an elderly lady who was always home. She rarely left the building, and Paulo saw her nearly every day in the lobby. He knocked on her door several times, but there was no response. Paulo's sense of panic began to rise. He tried calling a few neighbors, but none of them answered. At this point, he realized something very strange was going on. Determined to figure out what was happening, Paulo started searching the entire building. He checked the basement, the common areas, and the parking lot, but there was absolutely no one. None of the cars had been moved from the garage, yet it seemed as though every resident had simply vanished. There were no notes, no signs of moving out, nothing that could explain the collective disappearance. By late afternoon, Paulo decided to go to the nearest police station to report the disappearances. When he arrived, the officers greeted him with skepticism. They found his story odd but didn't give it much attention. They suggested it was probably just a coincidence, with everyone away on vacation at the same time. But Paulo knew that didn't make sense. It was impossible for so many people to disappear without a trace, without telling anyone. The feeling of being alone in the building started to weigh heavily on him. The nights were particularly difficult. Paulo began to hear sounds he couldn't identify, things moving through the empty building. Distant footsteps, doors creaking, and even whispers that seemed to come from the end of the hallway. At first, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him due to the silence and isolation, but the sounds were too real to be imagined. One night, while trying to sleep, Paulo heard a knock on his door. His heart raced. Who could it be? He rushed to the door, but when he opened it, no one was there. The hallway was empty, and the building was still shrouded in the same eerie silence. Determined not to let fear take over, he started leaving all the lights on and locking every door and window in his apartment. One morning, while investigating the building's basement, Paulo found something unexpected, a notebook hidden in a corner. It seemed to belong to one of the former residents and was filled with notes. The first few pages seemed normal, but as he continued reading, the notes became increasingly disturbing. The resident wrote about hearing strange noises at night, seeing shadows moving in the hallways, and in the last pages, they mentioned the disappearance of other neighbors, just like what was happening now. Paulo's fear grew. He wasn't just alone, there was something else there, something he couldn't understand. Every night, the noises intensified, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The solitude, which had once been a curiosity, was now unbearable. He started to believe that he might be the next one to disappear. One night, the noises became overwhelming. Paulo heard footsteps running down the hallway, doors slamming, and indistinct voices. He rushed to the window, looking out into the street, hoping to see someone, but the silence outside was even more terrifying. When he turned back inside, he realized his apartment door was open. He knew he had locked it. Now, with his heart pounding and fear taking over, he felt that he was no longer alone. The next day, Paulo packed his bags and decided he couldn't stay in the building any longer. But as he descended to the lobby, he was met with a shocking sight. All the residents were back, acting as if nothing had happened. Children were playing in the hallway, neighbors were chatting, and even the doorman was at his post, as if the days of emptiness and silence had never existed. Paulo tried to talk to some of them, but no one seemed to remember disappearing. To them, everything was perfectly normal. With no answers, Paulo left the building, unsure if he would ever return. The mystery of the empty building was never solved, and he knew that, even though his neighbors were back, something was deeply wrong with that place. And you, what would you do if all your neighbors disappeared without a trace? Share your theories in the comments, and don't forget to like and share this video with your friends. Maybe someone has an explanation for the mystery that Paulo was never able to uncover.